right, we're good to go here. Well, Nikki, thank you again for making the time to join Mom's Grab Coffee today. I'm really excited about what we are going to talk about. You have tons and tons of personal experience as well as wisdom into trusting God and building a faith that never fails, loving the life that you have. I just love all of that you talk about through your mission. So I'm excited.
Me too. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So before we get into your story, if you could just tell us a little bit about yourself. Who are you and what do you do?
Yeah, well, as you can tell from the accent, I'm I'm a Brit here in the USA, and I'm also a wife and a mom of 3 grown-up children. Last one is going through college, and we moved over here about 16 years ago to plant a church. So we came from London. We'd spent a couple of years in seminary in Oxford in England, and then we came over here. And now I write, I'm an author and a speaker and a coach, and I just love being here. So that's who I am.
Fantastic. Yes. And we'll certainly go through some of the resources that you have. But let's just go ahead and dive into something that you talk about a lot on your site, and that is building a faith that never fails. And I love that. I think we all want to get there. But can you take a few minutes to talk about what that actually means and deconstruct that?
What it doesn't mean is a perfect faith. It doesn't mean that, it's almost easier to say what it doesn't mean than what it does mean. I think we can grasp in our head what we would like it to mean, that no matter what life chucks our way, whether it's, parenting issues, a diagnosis, financial issues, relational issues, whatever it is, the grief, the loss, just the struggle of the day to day, no matter what it is, that our faith doesn't shatter. Now, it doesn't mean it doesn't bend. It doesn't mean that we don't doubt. It doesn't mean that, we're not angry with God or we're questioning anything like that. But it means that we know that we know that we know that God is good and he is not going to leave us. And our faith isn't based on how amazing we are, but it's based on how amazing he is. And it's not a function of, whether we go to church, how often we read our Bibles, whether we highlight our Bibles, whether we have an hour-long quiet time in the morning, nothing like that. It's based on who he is, what he's done. And really, a faith that never fails is a faith that no matter what, just keeps leaning into him, even if we lean into him with questions, doubts, lament, all the things. So really, it's a faith that can weather the storms.
Yeah, and you said it a few times. It's about who God is and his character and how he provides for us, however we might be feeling, whether we are doubting, whether we are questioning. It's about God. And I think that's really important to note because we live in a world where it's a lot about us, right? Like, look at us and, what are we striving towards? What are we doing? But that's not really what it's about. So, Nikki, let's get into your story here. You have a really, really amazing journey of faith through an incredibly heartbreaking, difficult journey. So can you share a little bit about that and tell us where your passion for God comes from?
So the difficult part of my story, well, we'd had bumps and rocks and hard things, but I lost my mum to cancer when she was just 62. And at that point, I was in England, she was living in Vancouver, Canada. And so we had this long distance, which was really tricky when you're trying to love someone and care for someone who is so far away. And unfortunately, she passed away at just 62. And then about 6 years after that, my sister was diagnosed as well. And she was just 42. And by this point, we were in Charlotte, North Carolina. She was in England. And again, this long distance, very you know, it's hard. It's really hard. You want to be there for somebody. And again, unfortunately, she passed away when she was just 43. And then just 6 weeks after that, I was diagnosed. And theirs was both lung cancer, and mine wasn't lung cancer. Mine was rectal cancer. And it felt like the family heat-seeking missile of death had locked in on me, or more specifically, my rear end. And as far as our kids were concerned, people who got cancer died and died quickly. And we had come to America to do God's work, to love his people, to share the gospel, to plant a church. And it just felt so unfair. My faith was rocked. I didn't doubt God existed, but I did challenge him. I was like, God, are you kidding me? After all we've done for you? Yeah. And so it was through that I really learned to lean into God. There were times when I was angry and questioning him, of course, but always turning to him in that. That's what I found out, that when I turned away from him with my questions, or turned away from him in my sadness or my grief, that was when my faith just began to fall apart. And there's a part in the Gospels where Jesus asks the disciples if they're going to leave him as well, because everyone else had kind of deserted him. And they say, where else would I go? And I think I'd got to a point in my walk with Jesus that it was like, well, where else would I go? We didn't come to faith until the second year, until the first year that we were married. So I had tried a lot of alternatives to God at that point. And so I really felt like, well, where else would I go? And, you know, I'm a Brit with a perfectly waxed and stiff upper lip. And so I was determined to survive and keep calm and carry on. But it got to the point that surviving was all I was doing. And then I met people who called themselves cancer thrivers. And what was so wonderful is that they weren't saying that it wasn't hard. They weren't faking it. They were just saying, I know life is really hard and rubbish right now and painful, and I don't know how long I've got, but I'm jolly well going to grab the most out of it and thrive, not just survive, no matter what. And there was something so inviting and enticing about that. And I was like, I want that. I want that no matter what this diagnosis holds. And so I started to learn how to thrive and not just survive in my faith, in my life, with my diagnosis and things. And what I saw was that even though God didn't heal me in a miraculous puff of, you know, spiritual wonderfulness, he was there the whole time. And I saw him move in amazing ways. And like I said earlier, it just became so clear that he wasn't going anywhere. He wasn't mad at me. He wasn't waiting for me to do anything or be anything that I wasn't. And he just wanted to love me. And in my walk with him, I was learning that 2 steps forward and 1 step back is still progress. And so really, over the years, planting a church, seeing him move through that, seeing him move through the loss of my mum and my sister and my diagnosis, and now through raising 3 kids and seeing him do amazing things in and through them, even though they're all over the place faith-wise right now. I won't say they're all strong believers and everything's tied up with a pretty bow, but that's where my passion comes from my relationship with him and from seeing him work and just knowing there's nowhere else I'd rather be.
Yeah, what a beautiful testimony. And Nikki, I want to ask you about that, the point where you turned to God, you had nowhere else to go. What did that actually look and feel like?
It looked like an honest conversation. It
Mm-hmm.
looked like me saying to him, are you kidding me, God? After all I've done for you. I mean, I would pray those prayers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And thankfully, the psalmists have gone before us and given us a very clear
Right.
model,
Yeah.
if you like, or permission. You read some of the Psalms and it's like,
Mm-hmm.
how long, God? Where are you? And
Mm-hmm.
I decided that I was going to do the same, that I was going to question him. And I wish I could say that, I heard an audible voice from heaven that was like, that was comforting. But just over time, I knew that he wasn't going anywhere, that
Mm-hmm.
I felt his peace in the middle of panic. I felt comforted in the middle of my grief. And I always thought that emotions were separate, that you either felt peace or panic, or you felt happy or you felt sad. But what I learned was
Mm-hmm.
that somehow we can hold them in the palm of our hand together. And I felt like that was God's provision and God's love for me in those moments.
Yeah, and that speaks to the whole idea of things not making sense. Like how could it not be God? Especially the way you put it, how you can be panicking, but you can also be peaceful. Like that doesn't really make sense in our mortal minds. But when you feel it, when you're walking through it, I think the only thing you can do is attribute that to God. I think that's amazing.
Exactly.
You also said surviving. So you went from being a survivor to a thriver. Uh, can you break us down from a personal experience? What does that actually mean? Like, what did that shift look like?
Well, what it meant in terms of outlook was that I had broken out of survival mode. And I'm not saying anyone who is a survivor or a survivor of assault or anything like that isn't a great thing. Where I had got to was surviving was all I was doing. And I wanted to thrive. I wanted to feel that abundant life that God had promised me. But I had got into this mode where I was thinking that, well, I'm in the middle of the storm he promised me. So therefore the abundant life he promised me would be far off in the future. When I
Mm-hmm.
say he
Mm-hmm.
promised us storms, he said we will have storms. And so I had assumed that this full, abundant life that's rich and overflowing would be off in the future somewhere. Maybe when my cancer was over. And then I realized, well, what if my cancer's never over? And did Jesus really mean that those two things, the storm and the abundance, are separate? And I realized what I'd
Mm-hmm.
been guilty of, as many of us are, is equating the abundant life with a pain-free, happy, skippy, healthy, wealthy life that is easy. And
Mm-hmm.
when I realized that, it got me thinking about, well, what is an abundant life really? Well, it's not one where we don't feel any pain, that we don't argue with anyone, that nobody upsets us, or we don't get diagnosed with something, or we don't lose a loved one and our children are just perfectly behaved and never get sick.
Mm-hmm.
What it means is that there is abundance with him, that there is intimacy and connection and laughter and joy and peace and comfort, all those things, no matter what. And so to me,
Mm-hmm.
that's what it would look like to thrive, to feel those things,
Mm-hmm.
as well as and in spite of all the other things that were going down. And I realized that there were 7 key parts of that that I could learn, that I could lean into, that I could get better at to help me thrive and not just survive. And that's what I put in my first book, Breathe Again, How to Live Well When
Mm-hmm.
Life Falls Apart.
Yeah, I actually just read that recently. It's a beautiful book. I'll have a link to that in the show notes for everyone to go check it out. But it is a really great book, really practical stuff in there.
Thank
All
you.
right. Well, Nikki, what an amazing testimony. I want to turn back the clock and ask you if you could talk to your 18-year-old self before everything happened, what would you tell her?
Mm. Such a great question. When I was 18, my parents had divorced. My mum was living in Vancouver, Canada, and my dad had just got remarried. So I was kind of living on my own before I went off to university. I always say that my parents left home before I did. And it was an exciting time as I headed off to university, but also a daunting time. And I think I would tell myself to trust myself. And what I mean by that is I doubted myself on so many levels. Now, I'm a reasonably confident person, but I think that confidence was in what I could do and not who I was. And so I would want to encourage my 18-year-old self to trust my intuition, which I would later learn to know is also one of the key ways that God speaks to us. And so I would say it's going to be okay. Trust yourself. And you don't have to make some of the decisions that you want to make, that you're making out of fear, or, fear of missing out, fear of being alone, whatever it is. So I want to say, trust yourself.
Mm-hmm. And when you say who you are, what do you mean by that?
I think what I mean is that so much of my validation in life had been coming from my abilities and my skills and what I could do. I was an athlete. I was, a prefect at school, if you know what those are, reasonably popular. I mean, all those kind of things. But did I believe I was loved and seen and enough just as I am without those things? Probably not. And so knowing that I am loved, and later knowing that that love is from God, that he loves me because of who he is, that God is love, and he created me, and I'm loved just as I am.
Yeah. Yeah. And did you know that going into, your mom's diagnosis of cancer, and then your sister, and then yourself?
Yes. So I think I did more, but I'd like to say, oh, yes, I've checked that box and I know exactly who I am and how loved I am. But let's just say we're all a work in progress on that front.
Right.
So I think more and more I'm growing in it every day. I mean, I'm mid-50s and still got a lot of ways to go. But yeah, a lot more.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know if we can ever say we're fully there, right? Just because, every day we're going through new hardships, continuing hardships. Our emotions are flying, our thoughts are flying. So constantly taking us back to who we are, I think is always going to be something we have to do. I'd love it if
Exactly.
it just, we didn't have to do that. Let's just like you press the button, power on, and it just stays on. I don't think that's life, right?
No, it would be nice though.
Yeah, it'd be really nice. So, Nikki, your mission of helping us love the life we have by growing the faith we long for, I mean, I think it's an incredible mission. What are some things we can do to grow our faith and start thriving through life's hardest circumstances? Whether that is the daily grind of motherhood, whether we have little ones or we're going through bigger transitions with our children ourselves, what can we do to keep growing our faith and thriving?
That's such a great question. I think one of the key things we can do is to be gentle on ourselves as we grow our faith. You know, I think it's very easy to get into almost faith shame. You know, it's not good enough. I don't have enough faith. They've got more faith than me. But I think there are things we can do to grow our faith. We can learn to trust God when we can't stop worrying. And I learned, and I talk about this, I've got a little ebook people can grab if they want that, called How to Trust God When You Can't Stop Worrying. Because what I learned through my cancer was that trusting God doesn't just happen the moment we meet Jesus. It's something we can learn. It's something we can practice. It's something we can get better at. And I knew from my own experience that if I wanted to trust God when life turns upside down, I had to have a plan. You know, when life's wonderful, we're like, oh yes, I trust God. That's easy. You know, I'll always trust God, you know, and then something happens and, you know, your boat's flipped upside down in the storm and, you know, trusting God is not so easy. And I realized that if I wanted to trust God when life was hard, I needed a plan. I needed a plan to build my trust muscles and get better at it so that when life does become rocky, then my trust is stronger. I'm going to worry less, feel less stress, less overwhelmed, feel more peace and more calm, even when life's turned upside down. So I think learning to trust God is something we can do, and we can practice little and often, all the time. I think we can, as I was talking about our self-talk, about learning to love ourselves, that's something else we can do. And that's, so I've got this 3 little ebook bundle people might want to get for free if they want to, but one of the titles is Hack Your Self-Talk and Love the Real You. Then there's the Trusting God one, and the other one is about waking up happy when you're tired of being tired, which some of your mums might relate to. But I think doing these little things often, it's very easy to get into New Year's resolution mode and, I'm going to transform my faith all in one go. But building that faith little and often is the way to go.
Yeah, I like the idea of building that trust muscle. I've never thought about it that way. But practicing trusting, again, I don't think that's something that we think about naturally. But I think it's a really, really great point you bring, because if you are in the daily grind and you are practicing and building your trust, then when you get to those major storms, then you've already built that trust muscle. You already have a foundation to weather that storm. So, Niki, what's the number one way you build your trust in God?
Gosh, there are lots of different ways, but one of the key things I do is I keep a list, both mental and in a journal, of all the ways God has been faithful. And I talk about this in my little plan for trusting God. It's actually the final point, but it links back to the first point, which is to check out God's credentials. Because, you know, we wouldn't hire a plumber if we didn't know that they were going to show up on time and do the work well and all that kind of stuff. So I don't think it's unfair to say, well, God, if I'm going to trust you, I want to check out your credentials. Are you who you say you are? And will you do what you say you're going to do? And do you keep your promises? So a way we can do that when we're just getting going is to read stories in the Bible of God coming through on his promises and being there for people. We can read biographies. We can speak to friends who seem to have such amazing faith and trust God no matter what. We can say to them, how do you do that? What is it that makes you believe? So we can check out God's credentials. And one of the things I like to do is keep a mental note of how his credentials are building up in my own life. How have I seen God come through? How have I felt God's presence when I needed it? How have I seen him provide? How have I felt peace when it was the last thing really I should be feeling? All those kind of things. So I think really keeping a mental and physical note of his faithfulness really helps us build our trust, because we have this, it's like a trust bank. We're paying into the bank, the piggy bank of trust.
Right. Yes, yes, that's so important. I had a few guests say that, especially when you are, going through that storm, you might not be thinking clearly, because, so many thoughts and worries and anxiety, they're just, you know, taking over your mind. If you have something that you can focus your mind on through something maybe you've written down on a piece of paper, on a phone, whatever it is, then you can kind of bring your thoughts into focus. Um, yeah, I think that's a really, really great practice. And I think it's also, the little things, right? I mean, there may be um, big ways God is showing up, but there may also be like really, really small, tiny blessings that He's providing in order to uh, help you build your trust in Him and let you know that He is present and He is, He is there for you in your time of need. So I don't think we can disqualify any of those things either.
No, exactly. I don't think we should wait for the big miraculous
Big
answer
thing.
to prayer and base our
Mm-hmm.
entire trust on God on whether he answers the prayers that we have in the way we would like him to.
Mm-hmm.
But if we
Yes.
look for him, we will find him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Nikki, would you say those tactics are the same when it comes to our internal struggles with self-worth? Maybe it's failure, self-blame, more of those internal battles versus the external circumstances that appear in our life?
Mm. With internal struggles, when I think about mind talk, the
Mm-hmm.
messages we've got constantly going on in our head. And I talk about this in that little ebook people can grab if they want to remember it. But I talk about noticing it, naming it, and nuking it. And what I mean by that
Mm.
is we have to notice these thoughts if we're going to do battle with them, first of all. And so often we don't even notice them. And so being aware
Mm-hmm.
that we have a conversation with ourselves on the daily, almost all day, every day. And what are we saying to
Mm-hmm.
ourselves? Why are we acting in the ways that we do? And where is that coming from? And once we notice that mind talk, whether it's like, oh, I'll get ignored, or I'm not good enough, or I can't do that,
Mm-hmm.
or whatever it is, once we notice it, we can name it and say, this is my biggest fear, or this is what I'm saying to myself. This is who I think I am. And then we nuke it with the truth from the word about who God says we are and what he says about us and our situation and about him. And so that's the kind of little pattern I try and go through when it comes to that internal dialogue. You've got to notice it, name it, and nuke
Mm-hmm.
it.
I love that. Nuke it. It's such a powerful visual, It's like you're disseminating it, it's gone.
Yeah.
There's nothing left of it. That's really powerful. That's awesome. Well, Nikki, this has been fantastic. Uh, like I said, I think you have an amazing testimony and so much wisdom to share. You have tons of resources on your site that you've spoken about, where moms can go and learn more. Where can they go to connect with you?
Oh, well, I'm a people person. I'm a hugger. So come over to my website, which is nikihardy.com. Niki is NIKIHARDY.com. And if you want to get those 3 free ebooks, that's at nikihardy.com /book bundle. So you can get those there. I'm over on Instagram at niki.hardy, and shoot me up in the DMs and say hi and tell me that this is where you first heard me. That would be great.
Yes. And also you can say, I've nuked it. Go ahead and do that. All right. Well, Niki, this has been such a pleasure. I'll have all of those links in the show notes, and everyone make sure to go check it out.
All right. Thanks so much.